Hi, all. Thanks so much for watching the Stephanie Feals show. Today, I am joined by my very first guest, Zac Slabaugh, and I could not be happier to be talking to Zac. Truly, when I started thinking of who in the world am I going to have on the show and what is it going to be about, I thought of Zac. There were, the short list of 3 or 4, and for sure you were in that list because I admire you so much. I watch your LinkedIn, and I say watch, like it to me, it's like entertainment because I'm just like, what is Zac going to say today? But your headline on there is salesman, problem solver, endurance athlete. And then your cover photo has action over everything. And I think that does say so much about who you are, but not everything about you. But when you were picking those, how much thought did you put into that? Like salesman, problem solver, endurance athlete.
Surprisingly, and thank you for the kind words. Surprisingly, a lot. Um, Mainly because I think it's important that people know who you are, and I think a lot of people are scared to admit. I'm a sales guy. I think it's important. A lot of people are scared to admit that they're in sales, and so I was like, let's just make that front and center. And I think I look at myself as as a problem solver. That's what I love to do. That's, I think, the word that probably best describes me. And then I think it was selfishly, I'm like waiting for the day that Garmin calls me or some of these big companies call me and they're like, "Hey, we want to sponsor you." So that was kind of the actual premise, but I think it's important too that we can be kind of a lot of things, and I think we all have unique talents, and I think it's important to talk about them.
I I couldn't agree more with you because I thought when I saw that, and I've seen your page 1,000 times, but when I looked at that again today, I thought, that is who he is. And I bet he put a lot of thought into that. Also, because I don't think that you do much without thought. Are you ever just doing anything off the cuff, or are you very planned?
My wife would say yes, but no, I think yes and no, right? I think we all off the cuff, and there's a lot of things, but no, I try to do. That's one of the things I try to do is always at least put some thought and think long term, right? Kind of what is the downstream impact of this, and how does it work, and does it make sense? Which, without going crazy deep right initially, Stephanie, I think it's funny because that's one of the things that I I pride myself on, but is kind of my ability to stick to something. And my wife thinks I'm crazy, but if I'm gonna start a diet or go do some crazy thing, right? My wife's like, you're probably like have the most like stick to itiveness that of anyone I know, and it's because I think through those things, right? So if I decide kind of those mental gymnastics, if I'm gonna start something, I might as well stick to it. Like I'll think about all the problems, and then if I'm like, oh, I can handle those, then it becomes easy to kind of keep doing that.
So is that your process then? How does that, where does the goal come from, whatever this is? And then how do you decide how you're going to approach that, or if that's too big? Because you also talk a lot
Yeah.
about choosing goals that really do push you.
Yeah. I I I have so one of the that's a really, really great question. I think to summarize it concisely, and this was advice that I was given a long time ago by a coach that I work with really closely, which was if I could figure out what my life looks like at 55 and I could clearly articulate what that is and what it looks like, what it feels like, what I'm doing, what brings me joy, all of those things, then everything in my life, like I do believe, and there's a lot of quotes about this recently, but like there's people out there that are living the life that I want to live that I think that I'm probably more qualified for or better suited for, what have you, simply because they're just doing it. And so I think that there's this piece that goes back to I've spent a lot of time and I candidly, you know, uh, avoided trying to have that really detailed thought because it is so big and it is so um, kind of amorphous in the sense that I can kind of create it to be what it wants to be. That when I finally sat down and articulated that out, literally wrote it down, and share that with my wife. That is then every conversation I have, or every thought, or every action. Is this me doing this? Does this align with who that is and who I want to be, or is it not? And if it isn't, then I just don't do it, or try not to do it.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible. I will say, just because again, I've followed you and I've known you, we worked at the same company before.
Yeah,
So, for people who don't know you, why they should care about you is you are an incredibly driven sales leader. but you're driven in life, as you said, an endurance athlete, and then you also recently started a company, Relentless Running Co. And so all of those things. So how could you have ever known that when did you form your 55-year-old life plan?
I I was supposed to start it with my coach that I work with, like my professional coach. I was supposed to start it about a year ago. I procrastinated it because again, I'm far from perfect. I procrastinated it for probably 6 months. And so I didn't really finish it until I think it was September of this year, or of this past year, where I was finally able to get really clear on what that is. Ironically, I don't think having a running company was in there, but running my own business and being able to live the life that I wanted to live, and a lot of those values were. And so sometimes, I think the path always isn't as direct as maybe you want it to be, but you get there kind of however you get there.
How did you decide what to put on that? I mean, like, what do you want to feel? And you said before, what brings you joy? What
Yeah.
brings you joy? Because to me, it seems like punishment by the endurance running, all these cold calling people. This sounds
Yeah.
terrifying. So, what brings you joy? And how did you choose what that vision is? What does it look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think if I'm really honest, what brings me joy is proving to myself that I'm capable of something. I think it's the feeling of accomplishment. I think it's solving a complex problem. I think it's watching someone else progress in whatever that can look like. And so um, whether that's coaching someone or just having a conversation, watching them think through something differently. I, Exercise obviously is something that brings me a lot of joy. So that those are some of those pieces. I think where what was really challenging, and you're asking the right question, right? I think what was really challenging is, where do you start? And because it is so big, and it was very, very intimidating, and hence why I procrastinated it. And what I think helped me at least think through that was, at the end of the day, like the most important things to me, and things is a word, right? But what's the most important to me is my family, right? My faith, my fitness, my friends, kind of those legs on the stool. And so if I just went through those and kind of in order of what's important, like what do I want my relationship with my wife to look like in our family? Like what do I want that to be? Right? How available do I want to be? And thinking through it in that respect, right? What do I want our friendships to be? What does my fitness look like? What does my faith look like? How involved are we with our church, and what are we doing to give back? And so it was starting there and kind of breaking that down into something that was at least addressable on its own, and then using those to craft into, okay, well, if that's the case and that's what's important, like what does my dream life look like, right? And if that's the case, then I can begin to craft. If anything is possible in that standpoint, then let's craft what that looks like. And then again, I think going back to what I said, like I really do believe you can create what your future looks like, but without trying to sound Tony Robbins-ish or anything, it's like you can do it. It just takes actual thought and then reverse engineering into what's the process to begin to get there, and then being willing to put in, kind of make the changes, I guess, as necessary to do that.
Did your wife have input, or did you seek input from her when you were putting that together? Because you are exceptionally driven. She is too. She's in a leadership
Mhm.
role at the company she's in.
Correct.
So that could be interesting because you could both be on this rocket together, or you could both be on, going to different planets. So how does that work when you have two very ambitious people who are high achievers?
Yeah. I think the one thing that we've done well is, and she was involved in that, to answer your question. I think the one thing that we've done well is, even from when we first started dating, I think we had a lot of hard conversations around what life looks like together, because we're both, to your point, very individually driven. And to merge two driven people, where, like if we're starting a family, her career is still important, right? And so how do you balance that? How do you do those things? And so we've had a lot of those conversations. I kind of, here is my, again, this is my interpretation of what we've discussed in kind of my perfect life. Let's talk about this. And, I think in many ways we were aligned, which was really exciting. And so, where we weren't, we had conversations and I was like, oh yeah, like I agree with that, or I didn't think about it in that perspective. And so again, it's my perfect life. Like, yeah, I could create my perfect life if I was a single person for the rest of my life, but that's not as fun as building it with someone else.
It's interesting too to hear different people's thoughts because you just never know. And sometimes I feel
Yeah.
like my husband will somebody else will ask him a question and he'll say something and I'll be like, "Really?" He's just not an overly chatty guy and I think I talk so frequently that he just it must be like white noise, like my dog barking at the front door while I'm at the bus stop. Today I was like, "Is my dog barking?" Oh, yes, she is. I hear her because I was like, "Oh crap, she might be eating something at home." So it's interesting to have that, like, I don't know, it's great to have a partner who you do have the ability to co-create things with, and I do that with him too. I mean, I can't believe that he and I met so young. I was 17, he was 22, and all the crazy things we've done. Let's move to Las Vegas, like, on a whim.
Yeah.
We talked about moving, and then my stepdad said, "What if we move to Las Vegas?" And I said, "I don't know, let me ask him." And so I said, "Hey, do you wanna move to Las Vegas?" And he's like, "Okay." That was the start to finish conversation of should we move to Las Vegas? And I can't believe at 17 that I met somebody who was so on board for that, and now we're in
Yeah.
our 40s and we still like each other and still
Yeah.
get along, and it's like, I can't believe like, starting this show, that's not something that normal people do, like, "Hey, I got laid off, I'm gonna start a show." That's
Yeah.
like, you start from 0, and he's like, "Do it, you're great at that. That should." He's nuts, that's what you're learning right now.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to when you find those people who are just, like, in it with you. And so she's been along I don't know, I don't follow her LinkedIn as closely. You're one of my people that I always go look at. I should look at her. She's probably equally as
Yeah.
fascinating. But you're always posting these things. And so the things I've learned about you that I think are pretty interesting recently are that in the last couple of years you moved from Charleston to
Mhm.
Tennessee. Are you guys from Tennessee?
I neither of us are. We're both from the Midwest. I went to school here in Tennessee, and we actually when we sold our house, we had a rental property like an Airbnb that we would come up here around the weekends for. And so when we sold our house, we didn't have a place to go, and so it was let's move to the Airbnb with the idea that we would move back to Charleston, and then my wife is incredibly talented and many ways like Joanna Gaines 2.0, and so we found this beautiful old century home, and that was in despair basically, and so we spent 2 years kind of rehabbing it and redoing that. Finally moved into it last November. So we plans were to always move back, and Tennessee's always been kind of home in many ways, anyways. But we I think we moved here on a Saturday, and we she wanted to look at this house on a Sunday, and I was like, I'll appease you because we're never gonna actually live here. And then I think we made an offer on Monday, and the rest is history.
Oh
So
my gosh.
yeah,
And I did compliment the wallpaper. So you're right.
yeah.
That was
Thank
the
you.
first thing I said when we got on the Zoom. I was like, I love that wallpaper.
She will be very happy to hear that.
It
So
is beautiful. It's just like very sleek and I love it. I love it.
well, thank you.
And so another thing aside from moving, because that's a big thing, people take that for granted in this world that like you can just move, but most people don't just move. A lot of
Yeah,
people do, but it's a whole thing and that tests your relationship and tests work and all the different things. And so now you're here, you're still in sales leadership roles, which you are clearly excelling at. And then you decide to co-found the running company with a friend who is still in Charleston. So how did
correct.
that come up? How in the world are you just like having a conversation and you're like, you know what, let's just start an apparel company?
Yeah. I won't bore you with all the boring details. It's funny. We had actually an idea probably a little about this time last year that we should start something, and it was, hey, let's start a running brand or like a running apparel company kind of geared towards runners in the South. That was kind of our original idea, because it's hot and muggy, and if you've lived in Charleston or even Knoxville where I live, it's hot and muggy and it's very different, right, than anywhere else. And we kind of joked about that and then stopped and started, never really put a lot of effort into it. And we collectively, we ran a 50K together at Jesse Itzler's Running Man Festival in October last year. and it not Burning Man, Running Man, right? Very different. But it was in many ways like in many ways there was incredible speakers and workshops and keynotes and all of these wonderful things. And we were sitting there and it was a small 500-ish type event, huge. So it felt very intimate in that respect. And we were sitting there, it was like, how do we, just looking around, it was like all the people were really helpful and engaging, right? And polite and very interested in what you were doing. And kind of all those people that were there because they wanted to be the best versions of themselves. And I remember we were sitting there on a hay bale and we looked at each other and we're like, how do we capture this? Right? Like, this is what we all want, right? Which is a community that's asking you to be more. And we're like, well, what if we used that and created a nonprofit and started a nonprofit? And so we kind of started that process, and that's kind of put the works to just to really roll that out in 25. But as we started working that, and the premise of that is how do you, like, using running as a vehicle to teach, going to underserved communities, 12 to 18-year-olds, and use running as a forum to teach them valuable life skills, right? The importance of self-control, right? The importance of showing up, right? The importance of like being, like showing love and being empathetic and showing gratitude, right? Like being service minded, like those type of things. And so that was kind of the idea. Fast forward, we were working with one of our I'll call them kind of mentors, kind of as we work through this. Probably will end up being on our board for the nonprofit. And he was like, you've had this idea for a running company, you mentioned apparel company. Why don't you create that and use that as the kind of the vehicle to drive more revenue to the nonprofit? And so that's in the short version, I guess, of how that came about. And so we started Relentless Running Company. We love the name, right? Because I think that there's an associated mentality that comes with that, right? And we created this, want to create a really cool community and brand of people who want to be more, but also really give really premium, apparel that has a purpose at the end, right? And so dollars of everything we go to goes to our nonprofit, and that's going to allow us to then fund and make an impact to these kids. So it's I'm obviously really excited about it. I think that there's a ton of opportunity, and it's been one of those things, candidly, Stephanie, like I'm working a full-time job, right? And it's been in many ways kind of a side hustle, a side thing to do. And every time I start to go and put less attention on it, it's like God shines a light and a door gets opened, or I'm connected to someone, or something happens that keeps pouring gasoline on it. And so in many ways, it's my wife and I've joked at this point now, like she's like, this is probably where you're supposed to be if all of these things just keep happening to be that. And it's not always going to be easy, but we're really excited about what we're building.
Gosh, I have so many questions based off of that. But I'm going to go with what was the most serendipitous thing that has happened in that? Because I think sometimes people think when they're doing something hard, when you are good at things, opportunities can present themselves and it can be easy to maybe dismiss them and be like,
Yeah.
but that's not this, or oh, that's just this, or it's just this hobby. Like, how do you see those signs and recognize them for what they are and realize that's putting you on the right path?
Yeah. You're really great at asking questions. And I've never been asked these questions. I
That's
would,
my goal. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I would put it like this. And I don't think I'm the perfect person to answer that, right? I think I'm still learning a lot in this, and I'm young in many respects, so I've got a lot I'm still learning. What's been interesting to me is if you look at, like, if I take a step back and look at what I care about personally, what I care about professionally, where I think my skills lie, right? Where my interests lie. Like, if those were I'm sure you've seen that, like, Venn diagram type thing. This, like, RRC kind of falls in the middle of that, right? The nonprofit, the Relentless Foundation, kind of falls in the middle of that. And so I think it's just being aware of, like, this may never be my full-time thing. It's always going to be something I'm just putting effort and belief and time into. But it's really interesting to see, to answer your serendipitous question, I was working a webinar. So right when we were getting ready to get this kicked off, I think this is a very easy example. Right as we were getting ready to, kind of figure out, okay, how do we want to form our nonprofit? How do we want to structure some of these things, right? Some of the very tactical things that most people don't know what to do because you don't know where to start, right? And it's not like there's resources crawling out of the woodwork to help you there. And I was co-hosting a webinar with someone, and the guest that joined that webinar is a former Olympian. He's become a friend at this point, but he's started nonprofits. He's on the board of others. And so so I messaged him afterwards. I was like, hey, I would love to just understand. He's like, I'm happy to help kind of guide. These are what you need to be asking here. And it was just one of those things where we were literally having conversations 24 hours before that of like, how do we even start this? Right? Where do we even structure? And we had ideas, but it was like, I just needed someone, right? Like if you ever want to do something right, talk to someone who's done it before. And I just needed, we were like, where do we even begin? And he literally appeared. And then he was the one that kind of suggested, right? Look at, you've had this idea, like use that as a way, as an additional funding mechanism. He's been a great connector to this point, connected us to some people. And so that's one of probably 4 or 5 similar examples I could give you where it's just, when things start to stop or I start to move away, it's like, oh, I can recognize that there's some forward energy here, and let's appreciate it for what it is, because this is likely where you're supposed to be in the moment.
Was there a moment in your life that
Yeah.
you thought that you recognized a difference between maybe you and your peers, or you and somebody that, like, oh wow, did something get hard and you realized that you had this ability to persevere through that, whereas other people maybe quit? And I mean, you sold books door to door to pay your way through college. So if there
Yeah.
wasn't a moment, let me tell you that was it. Because nobody in 2009, when you would have started college, needed a book door to door. Like
Yeah.
the digital age was well upon us. So you have had this since a very young age. What in the world? I don't know. Where is this bubbling from?
It's really humbling, and I appreciate you saying that, because I would say that I don't feel like I'm any different than anybody else. And I truly believe that. The one, I think I'm probably the one person that just keeps showing up, maybe compared to some of my peers.
You're like
And
Rudy.
in many ways, right? I grew up right outside South Bend, so that's a really great analogy. Um, you know, it's it, it's funny because in high school, I look back now and I'm often really, really frustrated with myself. I was a pretty talented athlete in high school, in a couple sports, but I made so many excuses throughout high school and really never put in the work. Um, and I look back now, and oftentimes, and obviously we all think back to those. It's like, but what could have been had I had the work ethic and the belief that I have now, and the willingness to like lean into the suffering when you're trying to get better, as opposed to, or lean into the uncomfortableness. Where now I think it's still a battle every day, but it's something that I'm more comfortable doing. Where in high school it was like, oh, this is uncomfortable, I'm going to avoid it, right? And I think that's the tendency for a lot of people is to do more what's makes you feel good than what's uncomfortable. And it's funny that you brought up selling books. I almost quit that internship like a week and a half in. I made every excuse under the sun. It was incredibly hard. Um, and and I remember there's one specific moment that I remember sitting in my car, parked in a neighborhood, and up until that point, I'd made a ton of excuses, and like every excuse under the sun why I should work, or why I didn't need to do this, or why these people weren't buying, and et cetera, et cetera. And I remember sitting there and I'd be like, well, at the end of the day, like I'm the only one that can validate or can prove that this doesn't work. So I got to go at least, like, I'm so positive that they've lied to me, and that, if I talk to this number of people, X number of people buy, and that this actually works. Like, I'm now just mad that I need to prove that, like, myself right. And I remember kind of making that decision, like, I'm just going to, no excuses. Let's just work your way into a positive attitude type thing. And I don't want to say like that was the turning point, but that was, I ended up having a really good first summer after almost quitting when a lot of people had quit. And I think sticking in that moment, realizing, like, in some ways it was, I'm going to prove you wrong. and then realizing, oh, this works and I can do this. Then it became, okay, if I can do this, how do you get better? And you only get better by being uncomfortable and kind of learning new skills. And so again, I don't think I'm anything different or better. I think I may be willing to show up and willing to fail more than maybe other people. But I think everyone has that in them. I think everyone is just being willing to remove whether it's other people's opinions or thoughts on that or other things. So I don't know if I'm answering your question,
Yeah,
but
you
it's
did. That's fascinating. If you would have done all those things in high school and you would have excelled, then the answer is you would not be where you are now. Because
probably,
if you were
yeah,
talented, you could have gotten a college scholarship. You could have potentially gone professional, depending what you did, or got a sponsorship. And then you would have never gotten to the point that you are now. You would have never sold those books. You would have never met
yeah,
Jess. You would have never started this company. That would have never happened.
yeah, yeah,
So that had to happen for you to be where you are now and for you to have that real moment of realization. I love that. And I don't think I even told you this, but I also have a career coach that I really love, Joanne Feligno. She's my favorite. And she and I were talking because I did say to you, how do I connect these funny stories that I tell with these interviews that are just about people? And I said Neil deGrasse Tyson, Brett Michaels, Julia Hart, some of these people who are seemingly unconnected other than the fact that they're celebrities. And that's not why I want to interview. I'm just aware of them because they are. And then I started talking about it and I said, it's like there's something about me that I there's like an ignition switch for watch me. Like, and there's a weight loss
hmm
group or fitness group, E2M, that you may have heard of on Facebook. And one of the mental health coaches in there said, I will watch me. And I was like, ooh, that's it. That is
yeah,
it. And so Joanne said to me, she goes, that's the theme of all these people that you've said. And so when you said you had that moment in the car that you were like, I have to go prove myself right or wrong. And
yeah.
that was it. Like that was a watch me moment. And that's part of what I love about you, that you do things that other people aren't willing to do. And perhaps, like you said, maybe it is failing more. And so, what advice do you give other people who are going into these situations in life, no matter what it is? What gives you that fire to keep going? And then also encourage other people to believe what you say, that if you believe it, that you can do it.
At the risk of sounding Pollyanna, I think that at the end of the day, I think we all already know the right answers, and many people just don't listen to them. I think, and so I think from an advice standpoint, I think, and this was advice that was given to me. I don't have anything groundbreaking other than what's been shared with me by tremendous mentors and leaders. Is like you already know ultimately what you have to do to be successful. It's just up to you to actually do it. And I think some of that then, what one of the things that I always coach as I lead teams on is I refuse to believe that to be really, really, really great at one thing, you have to let other things suffer. I think there's truth in that in some respects at the perhaps highest of highest of highest levels, i.e., like Olympic athletes, right? Where if you're an Olympic runner or swimmer, there's a talent and right capacity thing that is there. But for 99%, 99.9% of people, it's just a matter of truly believing, like truly being willing to show up and put in the work and making your whole self the best version of you all, like of you. And so it's leaning into like if I'm struggling with personal relationships, well then every other area of my life sucks, right? Regardless of what it is. If I'm not doing another, if I've kind of identified what's important to me, um, and I'm not leaning in or doing what I need to do to maintain that, then all of my other areas, life suffers. And so I guess at the end of the day, you already know the answers and you know what it takes to be successful and you know what's important to you. And so if you lean into proactively every day, just saying, I'm not going to be the best, but I'm going to try to learn or do better and be willing to get uncomfortable in every different area, then I can continually I'll continually be shaping who I am. And so that's not perfect. Um, but we don't have to be, right? All we have to do is be who we are and show up, be the best version of ourselves every day. And, that as we founded, not to bring this back to Relentless, that's not the
I was
purpose of
going to
this,
bring it
but
back to that, so I'm glad you are
uh,
first.
but to bring it, our first core value, and this is embroidered on every piece of our clothing on the inside under the tag is the words show up, because you can't do anything if you're not willing to show up. It's the best advice I've ever was given is be willing to fail. You already know the answers. Be willing to put yourself out there. And at the end of the day, like if you do those things and you consistently treat people well along the way, like you can't do all those things and be a dick. Like if you do those and you treat people well along the way, then that is in many ways success, right? And if that, like, doors will open from that, whether you want them to or not, and it may be different ways, but um, so I guess that's what I would say. That's how I try to live every day. It's not perfect. There's many days that I fail at that, but it's constantly waking up and figuring out what can I do every day to be better here? What skill do I need to learn? Where do I need to lean in? What are my weaknesses? I can't fix them, but how do I work to get better? How do I lean into my strengths? How do I treat people better? How do I listen more?
It's fascinating, and I love that you're taking this to underserved communities because I think it's so easy to see people like you who are very successful. You're married to a successful woman and you guys are living this life. And I think it's easy to say, like, oh, this person did that. But yeah, they had this opportunity, they had this. And it's not. And, running in a
Yeah,
way, even though it's the simplest form of becoming active, really, requires no equipment, just requires you to be able to move, which is a blessing in itself. But I think there is on some level, there's that like elitism around it. Like, I need to
yeah,
have the gear, I need to have the whatever. And so the fact that you're taking it to these people with this attitude of you can do anything and failure is part of success and where you are doesn't define where you're going because you can
yeah.
all have this vision. We all have access to these tools and using your brand to fund that mission is beyond inspiring and incredible and I absolutely love
Thank
that.
you.
So my last two questions with you would be what are combined into one and you can answer however you'd like. Do you believe that anything is impossible? And if so, what? And what do you want your legacy of life to be?
Really, really great questions. I think the true answer is yes, there's probably some things that are impossible, but I think the more one lesson that someone shared with me that I didn't believe until I kind of threw myself in the fan of starting a running apparel company and in a world that I didn't know, is proven to be true, is things that seem impossible are actually a lot more achievable than you ever believe once you start working towards them. So I don't want to say that things are impossible. I'm probably never going to be able to run a 10-second 100 meter, right? Like physiologically, that's probably impossible. But I could probably get fast, right? I might not be able to do that, but I might be able to run a 4:30 mile, right? Which is different, but possible. Um, so I think the answer is yes, but I think the reality is when you take a step back, things are so much more achievable than we ever think that they are. Um, as soon as you begin acting to them, I think that proves out. Um, as far as legacy goes, and it's funny because I think about that. I mean, in many ways, it's aligned with my life at 55. But I think what I care most about is what my kids think of me, what my wife thinks of me, what my family thinks of me, and that's someone that was supportive, that was there, that they showed up, right? I was raised in a family where my dad was raised Amish, and that was its own right, but its own interesting thing. But my parents very rarely ever came to my sporting events, and I was a three sport athlete, was always there, and that was normal to me, right? And that's not I don't think that's a bad thing or right or wrong, but my dad never played catch because my dad never learned how to play football and never did those type of things, right? And so in many ways, I want to be, me showing up for my kids and being around and helping them and being their support system and helping them when they fail, because they inevitably do, I think is important. I think being a really supportive and loving spouse is important. I think being around and helping my family and being an integral part of our family in many ways, bringing being the connector there, that's important. I think beyond that, it's like, how many people can I help? I think that I'm probably the best version of myself when I'm helping others be successful, or I'm helping others. And so how do I live into that? Um, but other than that, I just want to be really great for my family, be really great for my friends, and be someone that they're proud of. Um, and then I guess I'll leave with this. And I thought this was profound, and this was from a Salil Bloom. Uh, he posted about this, but he did a mastermind. He had a former NFL or NHL player there, and it was like, be someone who you're proud of, like be someone who you yourself are proud of. And I think that's the legacy, right? Like, be the person that I can very candidly look back and be like, I'm proud of that, right? And I know, and so that's how I'd answer that question. And is I fail at that many days, but it's again the bigger picture. It's the same as, you can't run a 50K, or you can't run anything if you're not willing to train for it, right? Or run 1 kilometer at a time. And so it's um, yeah, it's be the person at the end of the day, right? That the war is more important than the individual battle that you're proud of.
Remarkable. Thank you so much for being here and chatting all about this. I loved learning more
I
about you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.